Stewed in curses. This, we believe, is why Lauren carries the appearance it is known for. An exit has yet to be discovered, if one even exists. But it is theorized to be a warmer climate, as a documented temperature spike increases on what is believed to be the levels with more surface proximity. He noticed Master Luna had appeared in the doorway of his lecture room and lost track of where he was getting. Where was I? Oh, the bastards. Well, I have sidetracked enough for today. But all the same, I hope it gave you something to go with, and I urge you to proceed with caution. This area can be dangerous at times, but will unlock many wonderful new things in the tomb, if you have enough imagination. Thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen. He received a courteous applaud, and the sound of many shoes shuffling to step around the benches. He sat down by his desk and started organizing his material. It was an amusing sight to see the Master Luna deflect each and every approach made on her. Question after question, but she patiently waited in the doorway and urged everyone to continue on through. When only the two of them remained present, she closed the door and walked up to his desk.
Layton, my friend, was the lecture satisfying?
Well, you know, at least I needn't bother with cheeky students anymore.
Rightly. 'Tis a coincidence that you spoke of the bastards.
I actually spoke of them as chalice component in general.
Well, anyways, interesting things are coming up from a hill. Connecting strings with Lauren, in a sense.
Is that a thing you have there? He delicately pointed at the folder she was carrying with her. She threw the thing in front of him without comment. While he donned his reading glasses and opened it up, she took a seat on the edge of the desk. Evidently, her bygone days as a young woman had only slightly begun to show themselves in appearance. He had known her since Menzies was founded, and she had always been the same. Even those that had known her longer said the same. The papers she brought were a description from a Thumerian archive. That is to say, the name had only sprung from the fact it had so far been the only chamber coincidentally containing the grandest amount of documented information. A second archive? In a hill?
Yup. Found it but yesterday. This here is what interested me the most.
The specific instance described the birth of one of Queen Yarnam's younger siblings. The complexity of the Thumerian written language made quotes a near impossibility, and what her finger pointed at was but a short summary of the real work. It went into detail about the custom regarding births. Apparently it was a joyous occasion for all, as the young babes were to be presented to the gods, after which they were left with them for an unspecified time period. The original piece, he noted, had been a general ceremonial recording where someone had detailed the specific instance, albeit with much grandiose flavor, mythological language and symbolisms. He gathered from the interpretive text that it was devastatingly controversial to have children out of wedlock, marking them as unfavored by the Great Ones. Since the Thumerian marriage was a vow of blood, children born outside of such a vow were not to be permitted. Upon the birth of an infant, a rite was conducted where he deduced from the mention of a high medium that even the Great Ones themselves might have been present in some form. The way the writer, as it was observed, had spoken of the return of the child at the rite's completion had implied some never left the presence of the Great Ones. He was not surprised, as it was not the first mention of how the Great Ones commanded the lives of their subjects, though the connection to Loran escaped him after he finished. A common ceremony with infants.
One could say the Great Ones, in a way, made it seem like they were their parents. Though they never solely produced these children, they demanded this of them, like an acting wet nurse. And no one were to have children without being granted so by the Great Ones. It just never happened.
And the connection?
The bastards?
I'm afraid I don't follow.
You see, I had this flash of insight as I read this text. Loran was found in a rather poor state, and I guess that the bastards, infants if you will, served a purpose. That purpose being to contact their lost gods and ancestors.
Ah, I see. Loran being the remnant civilization after the disappearance. They would have clung to old beliefs. This affection towards infants.
I want to know if there is anything behind this. Is this so-called affinity real? Did Loran manage to contact them once more with this method, I wonder?
Now, had he been the Grand Master of Mensis, he had brushed such a notion aside, arguing that there simply were too little information and facts that currently supported the claim. Many would definitely agree with him, but quite unlike the rest, he had the humility to see that's why Luna was Grandmaster, and not him. Jolly good, Miss Luna. I will look into it. Shall I involve more eyes in the process?
Do whatever you feel is necessary. We are currently chasing shadows, but my gut tells me something is concealed by them.
Right. By the way, how's the vicar? She stood up from the desk, turned and looked at him. Her carefree expression was gone, and now appeared like he had never seen her before. Concerned.
Not that great, to be truthful. But not that bad either. Recent events have him struggling.
Yes. Horrible. And you?
At work. Do not come scratching at that door, would you, Leighton?
He understood very well her state of mind. A friend can never truly die for those that care. Then you keep that vicar from falling apart. Her smile returned, like he knew her as.
Get something exciting from Laura now, you hear?
She turned on her heel and walked away. Hello? Someone in here? Back here, Leighton. He walked into the archive storage and turned into the second walkway between the cramped shelves to see him up on a ladder, currently placing in books. Yes, I require anything on the bastards of Loran, and if such exists, anything that mentions rituals involving infants or anything regarding such. The man with thick spectacles turned in slight astonishment and placed his pile of books on the ladder's top.
Oh, more on those morbid things. Well, let me have a look.
Morbid indeed, but there are exciting things in the works. Hopefully I can manage without putting in a requisition. He stepped down from the ladder and turned into a narrow nook where Layton opted to linger behind, as two persons would have problem fitting at the same time.
Now let's see here. There is this one. Luckily, Loran had many wise men that tended to do much more documentation.
In what category are you now?
Loran Miscellaneous.
Ah,
There are some notes here made by a priest or cleric of sorts. I have a small recollection there were mentions of infants in this one.
the man brought with him a bundle of scrolls and exited the darkened space.
He has been referenced before. The foremost investigator that desperately wanted to know of his master's whereabouts. And silence.
Ah, thank you. Nothing more?
Afraid not. Not outside of the bastard section, which I believe you are plenty familiar with. Might have to put in that order after all.
Oh, bother. That could take forever for the prospectors to find something. Quite literally.
Well, good luck then.
Layton walked up to his office. When he turned into the corridor where his office lay, stood two familiar and out-of-place faces further down. Talking amongst themselves in a wild manner was a middle-aged couple, a man with graying curly hair and a woman with a long ponytail and large round glasses. Well, good day to you. Whoa, Layton. Surmised you'd come about, seeing this is your office. He approached the pair. When will you relocate yourself here, Archibald? Admit the work here intrigues you more than that of the churches. Oh, you know, there's so much to do and I can't do it all at once. Besides, I get to work closely with my lovely Kim. Though, with the pace she's working, I feel like I share the marriage with her research. He reached his arm around her and smiled so his entire beard shaped along with his cheery face. Very pleased with himself.
Love you too, dear.
Kim remarked with bothered sarcasm, but Layton found it very amusing. But right now, I am preparing for an expedition down in ailing Loran, as a matter of fact. Oh, what a coincidence! I was looking into certain elements of the rituals. Not much to go on so far. Perhaps you can keep an eye out. The prospectors rarely understand the ins and outs of our requests. Certainly. What are you looking for? Well, anything that has to do with infants. The bastards? No, well, infants in general. Ah, you got it, sir. It was good seeing you, anyways. Likewise, both of you. With his arm still around his wife, They made their way down the dim hallway, seemingly resuming their conversation, while he sneaked into his office. Archibald looked around impatiently, not too keen on delaying for longer. His perception of the prospectors was that they wasted no time. Working in the labyrinth both humbled a person and made them aware of the present. But here he stood, on time and no prospectors in sight. When the group eventually did turn up, they looked as if they were sauntering up to the pub.
"Oh there, Professor Archibald."
A slender, mean-looking woman with ragged and patched attire greeted him with her hand. He shook it.
"Call me Izzy. Everyone, including myself, does so."
All right. Izzy? He could not help but feel slightly flattered by her casual approach.
"Well, now that you know me, these are my friends."
She turned and pointed out each of her friends as she named them.
"Varg, Philly, and Joseph. Together, we will have some fun exploring the most horrifying place known to man. Don't you agree, Archie?"
A spot-on description, I would say.
"And so you did. Ever been down under before?"
Once, yes.
"Good. Not a complete waste of skin, then."
No, just a jest. We'll take good care of you. She patted him on his chest, easy enough for it not to be hurtful, but hard enough for his glasses to become displaced. Without further conversation from herself or the others, they approached the chalice ready and prepared atop the shrine. Izzy knelt and evaporated in front of them. The woman, introduced as Philly, nudged at his back.
You go next.
It worked surprisingly smoothly the last time, and he confidently knelt down in repetition from what his memory could recall, and soon enough he found himself in a little stone chamber. Izzy was leaning in the archway.
"It's calm in here. Come."
He coughed away the fog that gathered around him as he emerged and tried to shake the subtle nausea brought on from his transportation. Lauren was a rather strange section of the labyrinth. Some even suspected they had no connection, yet it could never be concluded how far it truly reached. Although the mystery was indeed alluring, as sand littered the corridors of the same architecture as Thumeru. A hotter climate was experienced on higher levels, and many believed Lauren to be the remote part of their civilization. Gusts of sand danced mysteriously in the halls of Lauren. They walked out into a far-reaching corridor, some 20 feet in height and 40 feet in width over the floor, where they were quickly joined by the others of the small company. "Tst," Izzy emitted in a whisper, having walked all the way to the end and reacted to movement beyond the arching doorway. He had witnessed the denizens of the labyrinth before, slender figures, starved like they knew little else than to wander over the old stone. Loran, however, had beasts. Large and sinister wolf men with yellow glowing eyes, one of which had just walked past in the doorway up ahead. He wondered if they were old Thumerians that had fallen under the curse of Loran. Izzy and her prospectors asked themselves no such questions, however. She pointed to the left corner of the doorway, then inward at the darkness ahead. She proceeded to position herself along the right side of the opening, while Varg moved along the left. Joseph remained centered and approached the entrance. A man-like groan filled with the bloodthirst of a true beast erupted in the echoing space beyond, and a humanoid feral creature leapt out at Joseph. Something akin to a person landed on all fours as Joseph stepped back to avoid it. It had enlarged hands with claws and fur all over. Its head was grossly malformed and enlarged into a mockery of a dog head. Izzy immediately swiped down with a strange saw she had retrieved from under her large mantle. Something reminiscent of an axe, but with a thick saw blade replacing the customary axe head. Just as it had focused its glowing eyes at Joseph and stepped further towards him, it was assailed by the cutting saw blades of both Izzy and Varg. It let out a shrill scream before being pummeled to the ground. More yellow eyes lit up in the darkness beyond, and more malformed characters emerged from the shadows, heaving and grunting like animals. "Back, now!" Izzy screamed, and together with Varg stepped quickly backwards in the corridor. Archibald turned tail immediately and ran out of the way. Having only jumped back, Joseph had remained more or less in place as he was lightening up a Molotov cocktail. He jumped back further and threw it into the opening, from which beasts crowded through. Izzy and Philly flared up torches, shouldered up beside one another, and moved towards the inferno. The beasts scurried like rats at the flames burning on the ground, as well as approaching at their fronts. While the two of them expertly herded the feral monstrosities back into the darkened room, Varg and Joseph made a rapid advancement with another volley of cocktails that was thrown straight into the chamber. Archibald distanced himself into the entrance chamber, not feeling too unfortunate with missing the macabre spectacle. It was enough to hear how flames slowly ate away at their flesh and fur, stirring them to unimaginable agonizing frenzy. It eventually quieted down, and he peeked around to find the large sand-strewn chamberway empty, only fading flames and light from the room beyond. When he followed them inside, they were walking about a chamber with 4 exitways and a considerably lower ceiling than before, lighting torches on the walls. Izzy looked towards him with her auburn hair clustered over half her face, smeared with blood. She smiled fiendishly.
Loran beasts. Something else than the rest. Scared of fire they are.
She looked at the scorched heap of remains.
This is why there are special prospectors in Loran, you know.
She kicked lightly at the pile. Oh, you mean to say, like hunters?
Yeah, but it isn't talked about much.
I I have read what the church says of Yharnam beasts.
Yeah? Lauren is very interesting to both Mensis and the church for it. Tell me, wise guy, what brought you down here in the first place?
The beasts, he said softly. It took them, to his own estimation, 4 hours and 35 minutes to locate the lever and make their way back to the new unlocked passageway. Not as taciturn as her party, Izzy constantly would talk about this and that, with both him and them in between, the vicious repelling of beasts. However, it unnerved him when she grew quiet on the trip back. He thought merely to be an end of her energy to converse, but it would evolve into a suspicion of his, since many often find the unwillingness to speak coming from an occupied mind.
What exactly was it you were looking for?
She suddenly asked, sounding somewhat disinterested. Oh, well, samples mostly. For the connection, you see.
What connection?
You know, to Yharnam's. She raised her eyebrows and nodded hectically.
Right. Of course.
They continued walking for a bit.
And how is that going?
Pardon?
With Yharnam's beasts. They start to grow into more than rumor, are they not?
She sounded almost smug, as if she was the cause of the misfortune. Well, they are. That's why it's so imperative proper studies being made here. I am not the only expedition delving into the matter. Let's just say it has me more engaged than others.
Yes. I see.
You know, that fire tactic of yours. You might want to go to the hunters with that, if you haven't already. She grinned briefly.
Yeah, perhaps I should. Well, we'll be coming up on a big one here. Prepare your kit to there and stay behind cover. These usually are a real treat.
At the long hall's end awaited a grand double door that had him in awe for its detailed marvel. Izzy turned to the rest of her party.
Well, let's hope we get lucky with this one. Otherwise, well, you know.
They nodded, and she placed her hand on the door to push it open. The room inside was incredibly large and round. It was partially illuminated by a source that appeared to be sunlight shining through a hole in the middle of the ceiling. On the floor, centered neatly in the middle, lay a pile of something dark. They all stood for a moment, not fully knowing what to do about themselves and the situation. It looked to be fur and bones amassed into a mound. They threw a look around, asserting the terrain, finding it being void of anything other more conspicuous than the bone heap. They finally stepped towards the black pile. A bestial skeletal face, about the size of a wagon wheel, looked up at them among the black fur. It seemed almost carved with patterns on it, lines circling the eyes, and over the whole head. It started to rise quickly, standing up on bony legs. Or rather, the legs were bones. It was completely skeletal with only fur seemingly growing directly from the bones, as there was no visible flesh or musculature, towering a horrifying 20 feet above them. It let out a high-pitched shriek, despite lacking vocal cords. Blue lights flashed, and sparks started to dance all over the black fur, as if conjured by its loud outburst. It became so static that the fur flowed in the air like if underwater. It jumped at them, swiping with its bony, fur-wreathed arms. Blue sparks flowed along to its will and emitted from the claws. They scattered, Joseph and Philly to the right. Izzy grabbed hold of Archibald's collar and forced him along to the left. The beast's shrill and raspy scream would not relent while it crashed into the entryway and rasped along the walls in fury. It leapt graciously backwards and focused on those on the right. They dashed forward, evading the thunderous claws that bashed down at them. Under the large beast's body, they started to swing away at the legs. Izzy and Varg joined in, and to Archibald's astonishment, managed to fell the beast. It crumpled to the ground with a pitiful and surprised noise, the sparks disappearing. It feebly stood back up, with the fur hanging like long black hair from its body, deprived of its floating form. The prospectors were persistent and did not allow the beast reprieve. They swung, cut and bashed the large skeleton with such fervor they might as well have been beasts themselves. This had the large aberration retreat, nearly running partially along the curved wall as it did so. Finally it leapt out of their reach, turned towards them and once more shrieked loudly and ear-piercingly, so that the blue sparks once again enwreathed it and danced over its body. But the prospectors were, much to his awe, fearlessly persistent, and now they had discovered a weakness amongst the swiping claws of lightning. They could only continue to exploit it. Philly and Joseph ran towards it to bring it down once more, while the others started to circle around. Its head turned slightly after the two who were now flanking it, then back towards the head-on attackers. The sparks began to visibly flow towards its center within the ribcage, like it was a vessel. The beast grew still momentarily and proceeded with the loudest and most deafening scream, releasing the built-up energy as a raw explosion of force. Both Philly and Joseph were sent flying. It leapt after the flying bodies and landed with its claws onto Philly, crushing her comparatively smaller frame under its weight. Joseph rolled to the side and stumbled back up on his feet. He jumped the beast in an attempt to distract it, but the damage was already done. The bony claws had already ravaged the spot where it had caught its prey, tearing her remains into a red and mushy puddle. Despite him being aware of the horrors transpiring, at least to some sense, most of his focus was captivated by the blue lightning. Just like the thing dwelling in the sky, the well-known phenomena of raw natural power was now before his eyes. Having been tossed to the ground by Izzy, he had simply remained lying, jaw moving closer and closer to the floor by the sight of the beast's blue sparks. Izzy and Varg made use of the beast's frenzy, and while he threw a Molotov up towards its back, Izzy leapt under and with incredible speed began a barrage to the bones with her saw cutter. When Joseph bashed it with his pick-like weapon, it finally was brought down once more. Izzy started laughing in triumph and rushed out from under its collapse and forward to its head. There she plunged down the saw blade in a wide downward swing, transitioning the blade into its folded form and hammered savagely at the face. It let out a wavering scream, and the limbs jumped, but it did not stand up again. The scream of the beast faded just like the lights, taken over by the heaving grunts of Izzy. When the cutter broke through the bone and shattered through the brow, she leaned back and let out an agonizing scream. Her deranged voice and the passing of the sparks was what made Archibald stand up and look directly at her. He had thought such a sound would be from more disheartening emotions, but her face was smiling wide, and the roaring evolved into a laughter as she slumped to her knees, the laugh growing lower in volume as she did so. Soon it had ebbed out, and she stretched out her legs and leaned against her arms behind her back. She breathed heavily when he walked up to inspect the skeletal carcass. He touched the hair, which was just hair as it lay limp in his hands.
What say you to that? Archie?
She said between breaths, eyes still locked with the hollow circles of the beast's skull. I don't know. I cannot find the words. She inhaled in such a way it seemed euphoria had overcome her.
Makes you just wanna scream, right?
Having entered the cathedral's east wing with a brave mindset bolstered by a seething anger, the darkened hallways gave a fitting impression to the church, that being a horrifying one. With lantern in hand, Wynne had started walking much slower through the corridors blackened by night. He knew it well, of course, but with recent impressions, it was hard not to play into the childish imaginations of beasts and ghouls lunging at him from behind every dark corner. The hour was so late that he had yet to cross paths with anyone since emerging from the cathedral's grand hall, where a soul worshipper still paid his respects in the sleepy hours. Not much had been on his mind as of late. In light of his general disposition, one could imagine there to be a maelstrom of thoughts, but there were few. Eventually he stood before the door leading to the research archive. When he opened it, he first saw the receptionist in the middle of throwing his coat over his shoulder, who looked up at the entering lantern light.
"Oh, working late, sir?"
Yes, sorry. No bother. I'll be speedy."
"Well, no bother. I'll trust you find what you are looking for. Mr.
He raised an eyebrow at him, awaiting his name.
All right. Apologies. I'll just get this over with then.
He lowered the lantern and attempted to brush past the receptionist.
Again, it's not a problem. I was actually also stuck with some late entries. Might as well do them now, I thought.
Wynne turned slightly his way, not stopping entirely but wanting to plainly display his sense of hurry. Yes, quite a bother. But I don't want to keep you. He continued walking.
Hope you find what you're looking for. And please record it if you take anything with you. Just make a note and leave it on the desk.
He half shouted after him as he vanished among the shelves. With the flickering light, it was hard to make out all the shapes in the interior of the night-veiled archive. But upon reaching the Bard section, he knew he had found it. The experimental section that was not opened for leisurely browsing. His hand trembled when he retrieved the key, which the church likely would reprimand him harshly were they to find out how he acquired it. He waited a moment and listened, wanting to be sure he was alone. Finally he unlocked the barred door and entered. The categories were unlike those he was accustomed to. It seemed to be organized with an undetermined factor in mind, displayed simply with a number ranging from 1 to 5. On both his sides were wooden labeled drawers, with a sign of the number hanging up above, marking off each section. In alphabetical order he found amnesia. There were not any categories, and he had been lucky that what he was looking for had been located just upon entry. He opened it and flipped through the filed, documented folders. But he managed to search through them all, not finding the name he wanted. It made him freeze. His thoughts stirred. Having felt or pondered little, he now started to feel a creeping sensation of many things. Like it was the very visage of the monster in his kitchen that day that stroked with its claws up along his back. He flipped through the cases again, certain it to simply be misplaced. Then again after not finding it. Like the claw had buried itself inside his skull, he received a headache concentrated just behind his forehead. He closed the cabinet and staggered backwards, leaning gently against the shelf behind him. He looked up and beyond to the second sign. He entered deeper but found nothing of immediate relevance. He investigated further and saw that some labels were still occurring in the new section. Out of curiosity, he opened the grafting label in both section 1 and 2, which spanned 3 drawers in the latter section, being only 1 in the former. He was somewhat familiar with the developing process through speculative rumors within the hall. Here, however, he found that there seemed to have been much more research done into the matter than he initially believed. He did not bother to read the description of the process as, in the moment, it appeared very irrelevant. But he did notice a common label on the documents as he compared. Risk Factor 1, as it read at the top, along with general information, such as the one who wrote it. The other read Risk Factor 2, and he had thus achieved potential clarity on the numbered sections. He returned the documents and continued to delve into the third section. It was beyond, in the fourth, where the amnesia category returned. Here, he did in fact discover the name of his father. He sank to the floor, placing the lantern and papers down so he could read the contents. The risk factor was marked with a 4 and was signed by Dr. Harald. The record was littered with lengthy and descriptive methods, as well as references to numerous research theories. The core that he gathered made the icy claw from the beast once more shiver his bones. The impression he got was that this was not an ordinary treatment, but purely an experiment. Large doses of pure blood had been administered, and only a few complementary doses of blood from 3 different saints, which description of blood properties was only referenced to. The amount made his eyes wide and on the verge of tears. The coldness of the creeping terror of his mind changed properties when, further down, he read that beasthood was an anticipated consequence. Like the beast had burrowed itself within him, he experienced the first stages of an unholy rage swirl within his stomach, one that almost made him physically ill, had it not been for the furious amount of adrenaline it produced. There stood that they were positive that the blood would indeed restore capacity to the brain, and memories would once more clear. From what he gathered, the precision of the treatment remained elusive, and so they had simply administered enough blood so as to not leave any room for failure. Perhaps that the blood of saints was to guide or mitigate the effect somewhat. His speculations were not lengthy or very substantial, as his rage began to manifest in trembling hands. They had known. They had been well aware of him becoming a beast. It was the blood. It must be. By what other reason would they anticipate such a state in relation to blood administration? And by far the worst, they had done it anyway, chalking up the risk merely into factors divided by 5 categories. He shot up from the floor when he realized he might as well tear the whole thing apart if he did not distance himself. He paced around until he sat down along the wall. The holy blood. Fear the holy blood. The old blood. His thoughts now ran rampant, and it made him all the more furious. It had even been suggested that an observer ought to be deployed. They had known, more so than he could ever believe. Once upon a time, there had been a priest, or prominent religious figure of authority within Loren. It was he that coined the term Bastard of Loren, as read upon the curse-word slab. At the time, it had likely served as an arcane invocation of desperate aid against the growing scourge in Loren. Now, it served to tell them a story. Leighton had returned to the Grand Loren Archive, a cylindrical chamber with 3 levels, the 2 higher ones being walkways around the walls with pillars running against the carved stone railings. It was a treasure trove of knowledge, mainly in the form of a massive mosaic wall stretching fully around the lower floor's wall. It was not preferable, but he felt he had no choice after having reviewed everything so far documented on the carving and its related pieces. It was only him and 3 prospectors acting as guards within the giant chamber. Due to its size, he felt incredibly exposed to the freakish fiends of Loran. With only him and his escorts, only one of which resided on the lower floor with him, he constantly dreaded the unlikely event of beasts flooding the chamber. Conjuring such horrific fantasies was the accursed breeze blowing through the walls and the distant sounds, sometimes so potent it seemed the very foundation of the labyrinth itself shifted in place. The piece in question, the curse-ward slab, detailed the fall of Loran. By invoking its history, the creator likely hoped it to serve as a medium against the scourge itself. Judging by the outcome, it gave the impression it was an utterly vain attempt as a last resort at the end of an era. Since the Thumerians, and in extension the Lorians, were not much for documenting their lives, it was extrapolated that the piece might have served more utilitarian functions. But it had also been noted that the older the subterranean people became, the more they tended to elevate their own culture, which sometimes even involved recordings. What had been gleaned from the piece was that once upon a time the ancient Lorians had prophesied the coming of their lord. A god returned that would re-establish communion with the great ones now vanished. It was this single piece of information that had them concluding that the kingdom of Loran outlived that of the grander Thumeru, likely because of it being something of a remote colony or the likes. But the mural did not tell a pleasant story of a blessed child commonly revered in Thumerian culture, but that of a terrible coming of a curse. With so little information about the bastards, Leighton had resorted to combing through the mural despite it already having suffered meticulous investigation. Despite the abstract imagery and storytelling methods, rendering the piece the cause of many speculations to this day, he was under the impression the bastards must be a consequence of said curse. Since they were only mentioned at the very end of the story, one could assume that the curse evidently spawned them. For so long had he been staring at the horrible images, a collage of infinite details where one not only lost themselves in the curious observations, but could suffer great loss of time passing them by in the blink of an eye. He had been examining it for so long that not only his legs started to ache from walking repeatedly in circles around the chamber, but his eyes started to become irritated as well. He started throwing glances to the seemingly napping protector, vainly hoping something would happen that would relieve him of his maddening search. His exhaustion had him imagining a beast rampant storming the chamber that would force him to evacuate. Despite the terror, it almost seemed preferable so he could tear himself from the work. But as of now, he could not bring himself to willingly do so. He started walking along the curved wall, following the abstract but familiar course of events depicted. How priests of some kind conjured great pyres, mountains of fire where figures burned, but that eventually one remained like a glorious giantess to whom they bowed. The Queen of Loren, evidently, who would be the one to herald the blessed child. So far the prophecy resembled the old-fashioned Thumerian promise of God's blessing a womb with a child, albeit with the addition of fire. A familiar tale even to this day, that a chosen woman, a queen mourning her departed king, will be shone upon by heavenly light. Our womb will be blessed with a child, and that bounty and plenty will flood the land. Similar tales were told in ancient Thumeru, which made one wonder if they, close to the gods as they were, ever experienced that very prophecy. But as the tales would tell, the child never emerged alive from its mother, and a period of grieving and misery ensued. Scholars had paralleled this to the cycle of the year, depicted in a godly woman. But with recent discoveries in mind, things started to become frighteningly literal, and in Loren, when the child emerged, there seemed not to be a time of peace and plenty, but pure despair. The mother, the queen, was condemned, painted as a horrible queen of beasts and demons. Her child could never have been blessed by the gods. He stopped and looked up at the contorted, masterfully face carving of a terrible figure. The artist must have had a vivid imagination or an excellent reference to depict such a face in detail. From hair reaching down behind her figure, framed within the shape of a feminine head, was eyes and mouths interwoven with bestial features. Her arms cradling something not of this world nor the gods. It seemed there was grime over the figure. He could not distinguish if it was intentionally made to look like that, or if something had stained the depiction of the child. Carefully, he rubbed his finger against it just to confirm it was not inherent to the piece. Surprisingly, it felt warm and sticky. He brushed more to try and remove it, and in doing so, before he could behold what lay beneath the stain, the entire depiction faded out, revealing a doorway into a room. He stepped back at the event, feeling like he had ruined a precious treasure, but also afraid for his own sanity. He was instantly captivated by two figures inside. He was forced, trembling with terror at the sight, to approach. Within was a small square room with several utilities of an ancient time. Canisters and containers with strange tools, daggers and things he only beheld and interpreted in his periphery. For his attention was locked with a huddled, almost mummified figure sitting in the corner. It wore a white, blood-stained robe with long dark hair growing out from under it, flooding out over the floor. The head was turned upward and it seemed like a wolf's head was stretching itself out from the withered skin of a human skull, the maw open in a soundless roar. In the center floor sat a less ancient figure, prostrating before the mummy. It had the mensis attire, but appeared long deceased. Around it lay notes and scribbles on scattered papers, with the book they originated from laying beneath the corpse's head. He felt himself dreadfully compelled to investigate the ravaged book, and quickly, and with trembling reluctance, inched himself closer to the body. When he swiped the book out from under him, the head turned his way, revealing a face he could not recognize from the onset of decomposition. A pale face with sunken closed eyes and withered lips of a middle-aged man. The upturned pages had been stained by the process of the body's decay. However, they too had a strange glyphs unrecognizable to him. He escaped the room, away from the terrible sight, and shielded himself around the corner where he turned up the first page. It was untarnished by the viscera, and to his morbid joy held recognizable notes. I am compelled to record everything I hear, for I intend to not leave this room until I have heard everything he tells me. He talks to me, ever since I first entered, and he has not stopped. He tells he is a priest, among many priests. I must provide a warning, as he does not tell me everything chronologically, yet I must listen, and try my best to relay this invaluable information. I gather that once upon a time, the people of Loran despaired upon the loss of contact with their gods. The priests sought to crown a new queen, to lead them and bring about the new blessed child. Yet how could they? He wonders still. He stops himself to tell me what he could have done. There was no one to bless a womb. A queen could not be given. Was his sin really that terrible? He says that a queen had to arise through fire. A rebirth, an ascension in flames would create contact with the gods, their life and formless essence, pure and true. They sought the blood, sweet, precious blood, but was left to dry. A queen would give it them. He tells how a queen did emerge through the flames. Finally, he says, and he howls with joy. Finally a queen of their own making. They had learned. It was the gods' work that they did. Only a worthy vessel could adopt the formless great one in fire, blessed with blood and womb, fit to carry a child. And finally they found their queen. He devolves into great despair. I cannot understand through the sobs, and despite the terrible maw, I see only boundless sorrow on his face. He falls either into silence or fits of rage and roars out. He is sick of this curse. The queen was evil and vile, a queen of monsters and treachery. That child of hers was something else. Whatever caused it, she must have been a witch that defiled the gods' wishes and cursed her child. Whatever could explain the terrible beast she turned into. A horrible monstrosity. I shudder at the thought of such a creature. I dare not imagine it. He was cursed. The priest was cursed. But most blasphemous of all, the children were cursed. Bastards all, born of a bastard's curse, the bastard of the gods, stewed in curses. Then the notes devolved into the incomprehensible clustering glyphs of which he could not comprehend. What madness must have befallen his poor peer to conjure such a horrific story?
Bastard of Lauren. Special material used in a holy chalice ritual. Remains of Lauren infant infected by the scourge, a harbinger of curses and symbol of defilement. The additional rite curse defiles dungeons, but what better place to seek cursed blood gems but in the midst of defilement?